owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties. His property stretched across 15,000 acres of rolling hills and meadows in Montana. The ranch was worth millions, built from 30 years of hard work and smart decisions. At 62 years old, had weathered many storms, but nothing prepared him for what he would discover on that bitter February night. The weather forecast had warned everyone about the incoming blizzard. Local news stations called it a snow rage, a massive storm system that would dump 4 feet of snow across the region. Had seen plenty of Montana winters, but this one felt different. The air was too quiet, too heavy with the promise of something terrible. He spent the day preparing his ranch for the worst. His workers helped him move the cattle to the protected valleys where they could find shelter. They checked all the fences, secured the equipment, and stocked the main house with enough supplies to last 2 weeks. By evening, everyone had gone home to their own families, leaving alone on his vast property. The snow started falling at 8 in the evening. Within an hour, the world outside became a white wall of fury. The wind howled like angry spirits, rattling the windows of his ranch house. Sat in his leather chair by the fireplace, watching the flames dance while the storm raged outside. He had lived through many blizzards, but this one seemed personal, as if nature itself was angry with the world. Around midnight, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness except for the glow from the fireplace. Lit several oil lamps and decided to check on the emergency generator in the barn. He put on his heavy winter coat, wool hat, and thick gloves. The cold hit him like a physical blow when he opened the door. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked him over. He used a rope system he had installed years ago to guide him to the barn. The rope was barely visible in the swirling snow. Each step was a battle against the wind and the knee-deep drifts. The barn was only 200 yards from the house, but it felt like a mile in those conditions. Inside the barn, found the generator had stopped working. The fuel line was frozen solid. He spent an hour working to fix it, his fingers becoming numb despite his thick gloves. Finally, he got it running again, and the lights flickered back to life. The barn felt warm and safe compared to the chaos outside. As he prepared to return to the house, something caught his eye. Near the back door of the barn, in the fresh snow that had blown in through a gap in the wall, he saw footprints. They were clear and deep, made by someone wearing heavy boots. The prints led from the door toward the interior of the barn, then back out again. Felt his heart skip a beat. No one should have been in his barn tonight. All his workers had gone home hours before the storm hit. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away. No one would travel in weather like this unless it was an emergency. And if it had been an emergency, they would have come to the main house, not snuck around his barn. He followed the footprints with his flashlight. They led to the feed storage area where he kept grain for the horses and cattle. Several bags had been moved, but nothing appeared to be stolen. The intruder had been looking for something specific, or perhaps hiding something. Checked every corner of the barn, but found nothing else unusual. The footprints outside were already being covered by the falling snow. Tried to follow them, but the wind and snow made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Whoever had been there was either very brave or very desperate to venture out in such dangerous weather. Back in the house, tried to think logically about what he had seen. Perhaps one of his workers had returned for something they forgot. But that didn't make sense. They all had keys and would have come to the house first. Maybe it was someone seeking shelter from the storm. But again, they would have knocked on his door, not hidden in the barn. The more he thought about it, the more worried he became. His ranch was isolated and he was alone. The nearest sheriff's office was 20 miles away and the roads were already impassable. Even if he could call for help, no one could reach him until the storm passed. Checked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked tight. He loaded his hunting rifle and kept it close. The fire crackled in the fireplace, but the warm light couldn't chase away the cold feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the ranch. The wind screamed across the open fields, and the snow piled higher against the buildings. Somewhere in that white fury, someone had walked across his property with unknown intentions. Settled into his chair to wait for dawn, the rifle across his lap, wondering who would be crazy enough to venture out into the snow rage and what they wanted with his ranch. Dawn came slowly, filtered through layers of thick clouds and falling snow. The storm had not weakened during the night. If anything, it seemed stronger, as if the weather itself had developed a personal grudge against the world. Had dozed in his chair but never truly slept. Every sound outside made him alert: the creaking of tree branches, the bang of loose siding, the whistle of wind through gaps in the house. When there was enough light to see, looked out his kitchen window toward the barn. The snow had erased all traces of the footprints he had seen the night before. Everything appeared normal, but he knew someone had been there. The memory was too clear to dismiss as imagination or stress. After a breakfast of coffee and eggs, decided to conduct a thorough search of his property. The storm made it dangerous, but he needed to know if the intruder was still around or if there were signs of what they had wanted. He dressed in his warmest clothes and attached himself to the rope system that connected his house to the various outbuildings. The main barn yielded no new clues in daylight. The bags of feed were still slightly out of place, but nothing was missing. Checked the tack room where he kept expensive saddles and equipment. Everything was accounted for. He examined the tool shed and the maintenance garage, all normal. Behind the barn, however, he found something that made his blood run cold. Partially hidden under a snow-covered tarp near the old water trough, someone had left a small pile of items. Brushed away the snow and discovered 3 things that didn't belong on his ranch: a pair of wire cutters, a detailed map of his property with certain areas circled in red ink, and a photograph. The photograph showed himself, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. In the picture, he was standing on his front porch, completely unaware he was being watched. Someone had been studying him, planning something. The red circles on the map marked the locations of his security cameras, his safe room, and the spot where he kept his collection of valuable antique firearms. Felt sick to his stomach. This wasn't a random break-in or someone seeking shelter. This was reconnaissance. Someone was planning to rob him, or worse. The wire cutters could be used to disable his fence alarms. The detailed knowledge of his property layout suggested they had been watching him for weeks or even months. He stuffed the items into his coat and made his way to the house through the driving snow. Inside, he spread everything on his kitchen table and tried to think clearly. The photograph was professionally taken. This wasn't the work of local criminals or desperate thieves. The map was hand-drawn but accurate, showing details that could only be known by someone who had spent considerable time studying his ranch. The phone lines were down due to the storm, and his cell phone had no signal. Kept a satellite phone for emergencies, but when he tried to use it, he discovered the antenna had been damaged. Ice had formed on the connections, or perhaps someone had deliberately sabotaged it. Either way, he was completely cut off from the outside world. As the day progressed, noticed other small signs that someone was still on his property. A door that he was sure he had locked was slightly ajar. Fresh scratches appeared around the lock of his equipment shed. Most disturbing of all, he found boot prints near his bedroom window, as if someone had been watching him sleep. By afternoon, the situation became even more alarming. Was checking the perimeter of his house when he spotted movement near the tree line at the edge of his property. Through his binoculars, he could make out a figure in dark winter clothing, standing motionless among the pine trees. The person appeared to be watching his house, making no attempt to hide once they realized they had been seen. Quickly moved to a different window to get a better view, but the figure had vanished. Either they had moved deeper into the woods, or they were more skilled at concealment than he had first thought. The fact that they had allowed themselves to be seen suggested a level of confidence that worried him greatly. The afternoon brought another discovery that increased his fear. In his workshop behind the garage, someone had been through his tools. His hunting knives were missing from their locked cabinet. The lock hadn't been broken, it had been picked by someone with considerable skill. Professional burglars might know how to pick locks, but they wouldn't waste time on hunting knives when there were much more valuable items nearby. This felt personal. Someone wanted him to know they could get to him, could take his weapons, could move around his property at will. They were playing a psychological game, trying to make him feel helpless and afraid, and it was working. Spent the rest of the daylight hours fortifying his house as best he could. He moved heavy furniture against the doors and windows on the ground floor. He gathered all his remaining weapons and ammunition in one room. He prepared emergency supplies in case he needed to barricade himself somewhere safe. As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, the wind had grown stronger and the temperature was dropping fast. Realized that whoever was out there was either extremely tough or had found shelter somewhere on his property. His ranch had several abandoned buildings from earlier decades, old bunkhouses, storage sheds, and equipment barns that he rarely visited. The thought that someone might be living in one of those buildings, planning and watching, made him feel violated and vulnerable. His own ranch, his sanctuary, had become a prison. He was trapped not just by the storm, but by an unknown enemy who seemed to know his every move. As darkness fell, settled in for another long night of watching and waiting. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in that white wilderness, someone was waiting too. The question was no longer whether they would make their move, but when. The second night proved that was dealing with more than just one intruder. Around 10 o'clock, while he was watching from his bedroom window, he saw lights moving near the old bunkhouse at the far end of his property. The lights were too organized, too purposeful to be random. Someone was using flashlights to signal to others. Counted at least 3 separate light sources moving in coordinated patterns. They were communicating, planning something for tonight. The storm provided perfect cover for whatever they intended to do. No one would hear screams or gunshots over the howling wind. No one could come to help even if they knew something was wrong. He checked his weapons again, his hunting rifle, a shotgun, and his grandfather's old Colt revolver. Plenty of ammunition for all 3, but had never shot at another human being in his life. He had been in the Army 40 years ago, but that had been peacetime service. Shooting paper targets and clay pigeons was very different from defending your life against desperate criminals. Around midnight, the lights disappeared, but knew that didn't mean the intruders had left. They were moving in darkness now, which meant they were making their approach. His house suddenly felt very large and vulnerable. Too many windows, too many doors, too many places where someone could break in while he was watching somewhere else. The first sound came from the basement, a soft scraping noise like someone trying to force open the outside entrance to his root cellar. Grabbed his shotgun and moved quietly down the stairs. The basement was dark and cold, full of shadows that seemed to move in the light of his flashlight. The scraping sound had stopped, but he could hear voices whispering outside. He positioned himself behind his workbench where he could watch both the basement door and the small windows near the ceiling. The waiting was the hardest part. His heart was beating so loud he was sure the intruders could hear it. Sweat ran down his back despite the cold air. The attack came from an unexpected direction. While watched the basement, someone began cutting through his living room window with a glass cutter. The sound was barely audible over the storm, but he heard the faint scratching noise above his head. They were coming in through the main floor while he was trapped in the basement. Rushed upstairs, but he was too late. A man dressed in black winter gear was already inside his living room, moving toward the hallway with one of his own hunting knives in his hand. The man was tall and moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before. When he saw at the top of the basement stairs, he smiled coldly. "Mister," the man said in a calm voice, "we need to talk." "Get out of my house," replied, raising his shotgun. His voice was steadier than he felt. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen. You have something we want, and we're not leaving without it." The man took a step closer. "You can make this easy or difficult. The choice is yours." "I don't know what you're talking about. Take whatever you want and get out." The man laughed. "We're not here for your cattle or your antique guns, old man. We want the real treasure, the money you've been hiding from the government for 20 years. Felt confused and angry. "What money? I pay my taxes. Everything I own is legal and accounted for." "Your brother Johnny told us a different story before he died," the man said. "He told us about the cash you've been burying on this ranch since the 1990s. Drug money, protection money, money you made from deals you don't want the IRS to know about." The mention of his brother Johnny hit like a physical blow. Johnny had died 6 months ago in a car accident in Colorado. They had been estranged for 15 years because of Johnny's involvement with dangerous people and illegal activities. Had tried to help his brother many times, but Johnny always chose the easy money over honest work. "Johnny was a liar and a criminal," said. "Whatever he told you was fantasy. There's no hidden money on this ranch." "We'll see about that," the man replied. "My associates are already digging in the locations Johnny marked on our map, but just in case he was wrong about the exact spots, you're going to help us search." As if summoned by his words, 2 more figures appeared at the broken window. One was a woman with short black hair and military-style clothing. The other was a younger man with tattoos covering his hands and neck. Both carried weapons and moved with the same professional confidence as their leader. "Boss, we checked the first 3 locations," the woman reported. "Nothing but frozen ground and tree roots. If there's anything buried out there, it's deeper than Johnny said." The leader turned back to, It looks like we're going to need your cooperation after all. Where would your brother have hidden several $1 million in cash? Nowhere, insisted. You're wasting your time. Johnny never had that kind of money, and he certainly never hid any on my ranch. Wrong answer, the leader said. He nodded to the tattooed man who moved quickly around behind. Before could react, the man had knocked the shotgun from his hands and twisted his arm behind his back. The pain was immediate and intense, was in good shape for his age, but he was no match for someone 30 years younger. Let's try this again, the leader said. Johnny told us he buried 3 cases of money on this ranch as insurance against his creditors. Each case contains $2 million, $6 million total. He drew us a map, but the landmarks have changed over the years. You know this property better than anyone. Where would he hide $6 million? Tried to think clearly despite the pain in his shoulder. If Johnny had actually buried money on the ranch, there were only a few places that would make sense. But admitting that would mean accepting that his brother had used his property for criminal activities. It would also mean these people might actually find something, which would only make his situation worse. I want to see this map Johnny supposedly drew, said. The woman pulled out a folded piece of paper from her jacket. Even in the dim light, could see it was definitely Johnny's handwriting. His brother had drawn a crude but accurate sketch of the ranch layout, with 3 X marks in different locations. All 3 spots were in areas where the ground would be easy to dig and unlikely to be disturbed by ranch activities. Felt his heart sink. Johnny had been here more recently than anyone knew, probably during one of the times when was away on business trips. His own brother had violated his trust and used his ranch as a bank for stolen money. But that didn't mean was going to help these criminals find it. The leader's patience was running thin. We've been out in this storm for 2 days, mister. We're cold, we're tired, and we're not leaving empty-handed. You have 10 seconds to decide whether you're going to help us or become a liability. Looked at the 3 faces surrounding him. These weren't desperate drug addicts or local troublemakers. They were professional criminals with military training and expensive equipment. They had planned this operation carefully, waiting for the perfect storm to isolate him from any possible help. If I help you find this money, said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you'll let me live? The woman laughed. None, but if you don't help us, I guarantee you won't see morning. Realized his only chance was to buy time and look for an opportunity to escape or fight back. The ground is frozen solid, he said. Even if Johnny did bury something, we'd need equipment to dig it up, heavy machinery. We have shovels and picks, the leader replied. Johnny said the cases were only buried 3 feet deep. We've dealt with frozen ground before. 3 feet of Montana winter ground might as well be concrete, said. You'd need to build fires to thaw it out first. That would take hours. The tattooed man tightened his grip on his arm. Stop stalling, old man. But the leader held up his hand. Actually, he has a point. We need to be smart about this. He studied Johnny's map again. One of these locations is near your equipment barn. You have a backhoe, don't you? Nodded reluctantly. His John backhoe was stored in the large equipment barn about half a mile from the house. If they could get it started and warm it up, it would make short work of the frozen ground. Here's what's going to happen, the leader said. You're going to help us get that machine running, and then you're going to operate it while we supervise. Try anything clever, and Sarah here will put a bullet in your head. He indicated the woman who had drawn a pistol from her jacket. They forced to put on his heavy winter clothes, then marched him outside into the storm. The wind was so strong it was difficult to walk in a straight line. Snow had drifted to 4 feet in some places, making every step a struggle. The woman stayed close behind with her gun drawn while the 2 men flanked him on either side. The equipment barn was a long, miserable walk through knee-deep snow. By the time they reached it, all 4 of them were breathing hard and covered in ice. Keys were so cold they burned his bare fingers when he unlocked the heavy door. Inside the barn, the backhoe sat like a sleeping metal dinosaur. Had used it just a week before the storm to clear some fallen trees, so he knew it was in good working order. But starting heavy machinery in sub-zero temperatures was always a challenge. How long will this take? The leader asked. At least an hour to warm up the engine block and hydraulics, replied. Maybe longer in this cold. We don't have an hour, Sarah said impatiently. The storm's supposed to break before dawn. Once the roads are passable, people will start coming around to check on you. connected the engine block heater, and turned on the auxiliary heater for the hydraulic fluid. This is the fastest way to do it safely. If we try to start it cold, we could crack the engine block or damage the hydraulics. Then you won't get your money at all. While they waited for the equipment to warm up, the leader made draw a more detailed map of the ranch. He wanted to know the exact locations of every building, every fence line, every tree that might serve as a landmark. Cooperated, but he was also studying his captors, looking for weaknesses. The tattooed man was young and strong but seemed inexperienced. He kept checking his watch and looking nervous. Sarah was clearly the most dangerous. She moved like a soldier and never let her guard down. The leader was smart and calm, but noticed he favored his left leg as if he had an old injury. After 40 minutes, checked the engine temperature and declared the backhoe ready. The big diesel engine coughed to life with a cloud of black smoke. The hydraulics groaned as he tested the controls, but everything was working properly. "Where to first?" asked over the noise of the engine. The leader consulted Johnny's map. The location marked North Pasture Oak Tree. Do you know where that is? Knew exactly where it was. A massive oak tree stood alone in his north pasture, visible from miles away. It was one of the oldest trees on his property and a local landmark. If Johnny had buried something there, it would be easy to find even in the storm. They formed a convoy for the journey across the ranch, operated the backhoe while the three criminals walked alongside, using the machine as a windbreak against the storm. The going was slow because the snow had obscured many of the ranch roads, but knew every inch of his property. When they reached the oak tree, Sarah and the tattooed man began clearing snow from the area while the leader supervised on the backhoe. The frozen ground was indeed like concrete, but the powerful machine made steady progress. After 20 minutes of digging, the bucket hit something solid. There, the leader shouted over the engine noise, "Stop the machine!" Shut down the backhoe, and they all gathered around the hole. In the glow of their flashlights, they could see the corner of a metal case buried in the frozen earth. Johnny's map was accurate after all. The leader was practically vibrating with excitement. "Get it out," he ordered. Used the backhoe to carefully excavate around the case until it was loose enough to pull free. It took all four of them to lift it out of the hole. The thing was incredibly heavy. When they got it to the surface and opened the lock, everyone stared in amazement. The case was full of bundled cash, exactly as Johnny had promised. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, more money than had ever seen in one place. Even in the freezing cold and blowing snow, he could smell the distinctive odor of aged paper currency. $2 million, the leader whispered, just like Johnny said. But as they stood around the open case, realized this discovery had made his situation much worse. These people had found what they came for, which meant they no longer needed him alive. He could see it in their faces. They were already planning his elimination. The storm was beginning to weaken, and the first hints of dawn were visible on the horizon. Soon, neighbors would come to check on him, or county crews would start clearing the roads. His captors were running out of time, which made them more dangerous than ever. Knew this was his last chance to act. Pretended to study Johnny's map while his mind raced through possibilities. He was standing next to a 12-ton piece of heavy machinery with three armed criminals who thought they no longer needed him alive. The backhoe's engine was still warm, the hydraulics were responsive, and he knew how to operate it better than anyone. "The other two locations are going to be much harder to find in this storm," said loudly over the wind. "One is supposed to be near the creek, but the landmarks Johnny marked don't exist anymore. I rebuilt that section of fence 5 years ago." The leader was closing the money case, preparing to load it onto the backhoe. "We'll find them." Johnny was very specific about the locations. "Maybe," said, "but it could take all day. The storm damaged a lot of the landmarks he used. Trees blown down, old buildings torn down, fence lines moved." He paused, as if thinking. "There's a better way to do this." Sarah kept her gun trained on him. "What kind of better way?" "Johnny used to help me with ranch work when we were younger, before he got mixed up with criminals." Spoke slowly, as if remembering. "He always hid things in the same type of place, somewhere he could find again easily, but where other people wouldn't look." The leader became interested despite himself. "What kind of place?" "Maintenance areas, places where ranch equipment gets serviced or stored. Johnny knew that I'd never dig around those areas because I use them regularly." Pointed toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. If I was going to hide something on this ranch, I'd put it near the old workshop complex. It's been abandoned for 10 years, but Johnny would remember it. This was completely untrue, but needed to get them away from the open ground and closer to cover. The workshop complex had several buildings with thick walls and multiple exits. If he was going to make a stand, that's where he wanted to do it. "Show us," the leader commanded. Climbed back onto the backhoe and started the engine. The three criminals walked beside him as he drove slowly toward the workshop complex. The snow was still falling, but the wind had died down enough to improve visibility. Dawn was definitely coming, and with it the end of his window of opportunity. The workshop complex consisted of three connected buildings arranged in a U-shape around a central courtyard. Had built it 20 years ago when the ranch was expanding rapidly, but newer facilities had made it obsolete. Now it served mainly as storage for old equipment and supplies. Park the backhoe in the courtyard and shut it down. Johnny's other hiding spots would be around here somewhere, he announced, probably near the foundation of the main building. As the criminals began examining the area, moved casually toward the entrance of the middle building. He knew exactly what was stored inside, including a welding tank full of acetylene gas and several containers of diesel fuel. If he could create a diversion, he might have a chance. "Wait," Sarah called out. "Where do you think you're going?" "I need to check something inside," replied. Johnny mentioned the old forge area. If he buried something here, it would be near there. The leader nodded to Sarah, who followed into the building with her gun drawn. Inside, the building was dark and cold, filled with the shapes of covered machinery and stacked equipment. Led her toward the back where the old blacksmith forge was located. "Over here," he said, pointing to a corner near the forge. Johnny always liked this spot because the ground stays softer near the old coal pit. Sarah moved closer to examine the area was indicating. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench and swung it as hard as he could at Sarah's gun hand. The weapon flew across the room and clattered against the wall. Before Sarah could react, tackled her to the ground. She was strong and well-trained, but had 60 years of ranch work behind him and was fighting for his life. They struggled in the darkness, knocking over tools and equipment as each tried to gain the upper hand. Outside, the leader and the tattooed man heard the commotion and came running. Knew he had only seconds before they reached the building. He broke free from Sarah and ran toward the back of the workshop where he had stored several containers of diesel fuel for the ranch equipment. As the two men entered the building, kicked over one of the fuel containers, sending diesel fuel spreading across the floor. The smell of fuel filled the air immediately. "Stop right there, old man," the leader shouted, pulling out his own gun. "I don't think so," replied. He held up a book of matches, one of which was already lit. "This whole building is full of fuel and welding gases. One spark and we all go up together." The leader's confident expression changed to concern. "You're bluffing. You won't kill yourself just to stop us." "Try me," said. "I'm 62 years old. I've lived a good life, but you three are young. You've got a lot to lose." For a long moment, nobody moved. Sarah was getting to her feet, holding her injured wrist. The tattooed man was looking nervously at the spreading pool of diesel fuel. The leader was trying to calculate whether was serious about his threat. The standoff was broken by a sound none of them expected, the distant rumble of a snowplow working its way up the ranch road. The county crews had started clearing the main routes earlier than expected. "That's the highway department," said with a grim smile. "They always check on me after big storms. In about 10 minutes, this place is going to be crawling with people who know I should be here and you shouldn't." The leader made a quick decision. "We're taking the money we found and getting out of here, but you're coming with us as insurance." "No," said firmly. "You're leaving now, and you're leaving the money behind." "That's not happening," Sarah said, having retrieved her gun. Smiled and flicked the match toward the diesel fuel. What happened next occurred in slow motion. The criminals dove for cover as threw himself behind the heavy iron forge. The diesel fuel ignited with a whoosh that filled the building with orange light and choking smoke. The flames spread quickly, igniting other flammable materials throughout the workshop. In the chaos and smoke, crawled toward a door at the back of the building that led directly outside. Behind him, he could hear the criminals shouting and coughing as they tried to escape through the main entrance. By the time made it outside, the entire workshop complex was engulfed in flames. The sound of the snowplow was much closer now, and could see its flashing lights through the trees. He ran toward the approaching vehicle, waving his arms and shouting for help. Behind him, three figures emerged from the burning building and began running toward the tree line where they had probably hidden their own transportation. The snowplow operator was Pete, who had been clearing this road after storms for 15 years. When he saw running toward him covered in soot and shouting about criminals and buried money, Pete immediately radioed for Sheriff's Department backup and paramedics. By the time law enforcement arrived, the three criminals had vanished into the wilderness. They had taken the case of money they found, but they left behind the map and other evidence of their plan. A search of the ranch over the following days uncovered the two remaining cases of money that Johnny had buried, exactly where his map indicated. The investigation revealed that Johnny had been involved with a drug trafficking organization that operated throughout the Rocky Mountain region. When he realized he was in danger, he had stolen money from his criminal associates and hidden it on his ranch as insurance. Johnny's death had not been an accident. He had been murdered when his former partners discovered his theft. The three criminals were eventually caught trying to cross into Canada. They were identified as professional thieves with connections to the same drug organization that had killed Johnny. All three received long prison sentences for kidnapping, armed robbery, and arson. Used the recovered money to establish a foundation that provided resources for rural law enforcement agencies. He also installed a comprehensive security system on his ranch and built a new workshop complex to replace the one that burned down. The story of the snow rage and the buried treasure became local legend. Never again spent a winter night alone on his ranch, and he made sure his neighbors knew to check on each other during severe weather. The events of those terrible 2 days had taught him that even in the most isolated places, danger could come calling with the storm. But it also learned something else. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. When faced with impossible odds, sometimes the only choice was to light a match and trust that you could survive whatever came next. In his case, that gamble had saved his life and brought justice for his brother's death. The ranch continued to prosper under his care, but it was forever changed by the night when footprints in the snow led to a confrontation that could have swallowed them all.